The Brooklyn Nets, they continue to be active this trade season. They made another deal on Sunday before their 102-101 loss to the Magic in Orlando. And they brought back a familiar face in their latest deal. Let's break it down with the Brooklyn Nets beat writer for the New York Post, Brian Lewis, who joins us now from Orlando. Brian, how you doing?
All right. How you doing?
I'm doing good, enjoying this holiday season. And Brian, okay, so this Nets trade, right? They trade veteran forward Dorian Finney-Smith, also backup guard Shake Milton, go to the Lakers for 3 second-round picks. And they bring back Maxwell Lewis and former Net All-Star D'Angelo Russell. Now, the Nets, they will get the Lakers second-rounders in 2027, 2030, and 2031. So what did you make of this deal? And did Brooklyn get enough for Dorian Finney-Smith here?
Well, if you're dealing in the present, yes, they got enough. I fully understand that there are some fans that are still going back to relitigate the fact that they turned down 2 first-round picks for Dorian Finney-Smith when they first got him. But that's a younger Dorian Finney-Smith. That's a different situation where he had time on his contract. That's a completely different place than both the team and the player find themselves in now. The only other offer that we know of that was on the table was from Memphis, and you're talking about Luke Kennard, you're talking about a first-round pick, and Conchar, and the first-round pick was so heavily protected. I'm told it may never have conveyed anyway. So when you look at that versus this deal, they took the best deal that was on the table for a guy who, frankly, was probably going to leave at the end of the year and walk away for nothing.
Yeah, and you got to take the best deal that is on the table, and that brings back D'Angelo Russell to Brooklyn, back again with a rebuilding Nets team. Now, he's an expiring contract, so how does he help this Nets roster in their current rebuilding process?
Well, it depends on how you define that. If you're asking me, does he help long-term? He's not any more of a long-term answer, probably, than Dorian Finney-Smith was. He's an expiring deal, and frankly, it's cleaner. At least Dorian Finney-Smith, theoretically, he had a player option. D'Angelo Russell has no option. So he's not part of the long-term future. This was essentially done because currently, you don't have another point guard. And we've seen what happens every time Ben Simmons has been off the floor. We've seen how they have struggled to create. So temporarily, he brings more creation, particularly more pick and roll acumen than they have. What he also does is that's cap room, which is something that they have been hoarding, right? So they're expected to have $60 million, give or take, in cap room. But this deal, make no mistake, this is about draft equity. They currently, I believe, are sitting with 31 draft picks now, first or second round picks in the next 7 years. That's the most in the NBA. That's what this is. This is adding to that draft capital.
Yep, and that's what the Nets did. That draft capital war chest is looking pretty good with all those picks. So, okay, Brian, we've seen the Nets trade Dennis Schroeder and Dorian Finney-Smith this month. They've stockpiled a ton of draft picks, as you just mentioned. Are there any other players on this roster that you think are likely to be moved by the upcoming trade deadline?
Likely? That's a tough one. I'm not necessarily willing to say likely. Now, I've always thought that there was no way Dorian Finney-Smith would be here past the trade deadline. And I've also said, frankly, if you're tanking, the most logical way to tank is, 1, to move your point guard, which they did, and 2, to move the guy who is overwhelmingly the best plus-minus guy on the team. He was, I think, a plus 41. Next closest guy was like a plus 2, right? Though that's the most effective way to tank. Now, Cam Johnson is in the midst of a mid-career breakout. He is the guy who overwhelmingly has the most value. That doesn't necessarily mean don't trade him. They don't have to trade him. They had to trade Dorian because Dorian was going to walk out the door and you got enough for him. Cam Johnson is a guy that they can afford to be picky with. They can trade him tomorrow. They could trade him in February. They could trade him around the draft. They could trade him in July. We could find out in Summer League that he's traded. Doesn't matter. What matters is that you get the best deal for him. He's a guy that I would say is the most valuable, but do I think it's necessarily over 50% that he gets traded before the deadline? Not necessarily.
Not
I think
necessarily
what's important is that he gets traded when he gets traded.
Right. Not necessarily there. Nets do not have to move him. He does have a lot of value, as you said. We'll see what the Nets do in terms of other moves, but now they have traded Dorian Finney-Smith, and they have reacquired D'Angelo Russell. We'll see what other moves the Nets make. Brian, appreciate the insight and the time. Happy New Year to you, and we will talk down the road.
Happy New Year, man.